Today we're going to be talking about ratio and proportion. So a ratio, what a ratio is comparing two numbers. So we have x to y is one way to write it, x with a semicolon y, and then typically as a fraction. I typically write them as fractions. To determine whether the two ratios are equivalent ratios. So basically I'm looking to see, is 7/8 equal to 49 over 56. So that's a fancy way of saying if I multiply to get to 49, I multiply 7 to get to 49, do I multiply the same thing to get to 56? And I do, so yes, those are equivalent ratios. Another way you could approach the problem is if you look at 49 over 56 and you reduce that. Hey, well, 7 goes into both of those. There you go. Okay, so two different ways to approach the problem. Means, extremes. In a proportion, the product of the extremes is equal to the product of the means. Now, what that means, okay? So, A and D, those are what we call the extremes. And B and C are what we call the means. I have no idea why they call them that, okay? But when you cross multiply, then that's how you solve basically proportions, okay? And that's how we can tell if two proportions, a proportion is a comparing of two ratios, if those proportions or those ratios are equivalent. So use cross products to determine whether each pair of ratios forms a proportion. Meaning, are these two things equal? So I cross multiply. So I have 2 times 0.25. Is that equal to 1.25 times 0.6. Well, 2 times 0.25, I don't know why I needed my calculator for that. Well, that is 0.5. 1.25 times 0.6, that is equal to 0.75. So no. Basically said another way, those are not equal ratios. We do the same thing over here with this one. So I cross multiply. 20 times 2 times 20 is that equal to 16 times 2.5. Well, I have 20 times 2, I don't need my calculator for that. 16 times 2.5, I could teach you a crazy way that I have to do that math. But I use my calculator. Those work, so yes, they are a proportion, meaning 2.25 equals 16 over 20. Solve that proportion. So again, we solve proportions by cross multiplying. N times 8, or 8n, is going to be equal to 3 times 12. So 8n is equal to 36. Make sure I did that right. Yes, I did that right. Trust yourself. N equals 36 over 8. Remember, we always reduce. And 4 goes into each one of those, so 9 over 2. Okay, so the proportion, cross multiply. I have 4 times x plus 4, that equals 3 times 12. Now solving that, I distribute my 4. 4 times x. 4 times 4 is 16. We just did 3 times 12. Well, that is 36. I subtract 16 from both sides. And I get 20. I divide by 4. And I get 5. And again, remember, whenever you're solving an equation, you can always plug that back in and see if you're correct or not. Okay, so an application, and this is actually proportions are a good application of mathematics in the real world. So the ratio of a gear on a bike is 8:5. That means for every 8 turns, 8 turns of the pedals, the wheel turns 5 times. Okay, so what you want to understand is 8 over 5. Well, that's equal to the pedals to the wheel. Suppose a bicycle wheel turns about 2,435 times during a trip. How many times would you have to crank the pedals? So I'm looking for pedals. So you have 8 is to 5 as, okay. So now you have to think about what I was given here. I was given the wheel turns that many times. So my wheel, we have pedal over wheel. So I have my wheel is 2,435 over the number of pedal times that I had. Again, we cross multiply 5 times x. 8 times 2,435. And then I divide by 5. So our pedals look like I cranked the pedals 3,896 times. Okay. In a road atlas, the scale for the map of Connecticut is 5 inches is 41 miles. What is the distance the map represents by 2.5 inches on the map? Now, I love this because I love maps. And I love this because it's a good application. But quite honestly, we don't use a lot of maps anymore because we have phones and we have Google on our phones. But I think it's a good application showing you how I used to do things old school. So I'm going to write this as inches is to miles. Okay, so 5 inches, 41 miles. I need to know my miles distance. So miles on the other side is my x because they give me 2.5 inches. So I have 5x equals 41 times 2.5. And then I divide by 5. And I get 20.5. And make sure you give me units. Okay, so that is my video on ratio and proportion.